Hey, Paul, how you doing?
Good
afternoon.
Happy Mother's Day.
I guess I should say good evening here and good afternoon out in Utah, right? So,
Yeah, it's an evening. You're later than I am, so
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was actually going to start, since we started a couple times with the Boston sports, to talk a little bit. I guess the Yankees were losing today earlier, right? But they're off to a heck of a start,
Yeah. Did they not? I thought they came back, but I was trying.
I wasn't. I was watching the Knicks game.
It'd be something else if they get swept.
But yeah,
it would be something. Yeah, they've been playing pretty well.
Yeah, definitely.
The one thing I struggle with, and I don't know if struggle is the right word, but one observation that I have with is now I'm showing my age for everybody. But if I go back and so when I started remembering Yankee baseball, you had people like Horace Clark playing second base, Gene Michael playing shortstop,
sure.
People like that, and they would bat 200, 208, 210, and they were and they were just dogged on for their batting average, and I'm just intrigued by the major league batting averages nowadays. The analytics has taken over the game, and so they don't really care much about batting average as much anymore.
Yeah. Well, I look at it. I don't know how much time you spend. I think we talked about you spend a little bit of time at Moneyball too.
Yeah.
And I look at it that batting average now is a subset of on-base percentage, right? So if you have a good batting average, you're going to have a better on-base percentage than if you didn't have a good batting average, right? So, but if you're walking, like if you get these guys who are hitting 220, but they got a 370 on-base percentage because how much they walk now, it's that.
Yep. And that's Grissom for the Yankees too. Yeah. He bats leadoff a lot, and he leads the major league, leads the American League in walks.
Yeah.
So he's batting $150, $160, but he's still getting more walks than everybody. So it's a different, the analytics were the same back in the day.
Well, then you triangulate it with slugging percentage. So, if you don't have a good batting average, unless you're a really good power hitter, it's hard to have a great slugging because you almost got a Dave Kingman kind of thing, right? So then you have the big slugging percentage. Then you put together that OPS number, and then they get really exotic with OPS plus, which I just look at OPS. If you're right now, it's changed a lot over the last 20 years. If you're over 700, that's a pretty good major leaguer. Over 800, it's probably borderline all-star. 1,000, like Judge, is like incredible these days. And that's kind of the gauge I use. The same thing with pitching. You're getting away from ERA now because you always used to say he's a bad luck pitcher. He's getting all the balls are dropping. Then they get involved now with line drive percentage, barreled ball. So I look at WHIP. Walks and hits by innings pitched. If guys around 1-1, 1-2, that's a pretty solid pitcher. But the thing about the Yankees, though, it's scary, is you may not have your best two pitchers in your rotation right now, that you're going to have.
Our pitching staff is, I think they're leading the major leagues in just about every stat there is,
Exactly.
They're 1 and 2 on it. Ron,
I'm not a big fan of Rondon's, but statistically,
he doesn't. Maybe it's just because he doesn't pass the eye test, and maybe I'm more picky. But I got to give him credit. He, when Garrett left, he kind of got us through the season. But
before that kid, Schindler or whatever, he's amazing.
He's ridiculous, and he grew up a Red Sox fan.
And that's actually, I think that's an interesting one. It's funny. It's funny. I was in Anaheim this night. I was out there watching Springsteen, of course. And I was to see Springsteen in LA. I was going from Phoenix to LA, and it was the 99 playoffs. And it was, I think it was game 5. The Red Sox only won the one game that was the game. Let's see. So it was a game 5 in 99 playoffs. And the Yankees were about to beat the Red Sox 4 games to 1. And, 99 playoffs, game 5. And there was a scene, remember, a second base, all people, Jose Offerman for the Red Sox got in a fight with, might have been Soriano or somebody like that.
Yeah.
But the Boston fans were so ugly at that moment. And kind of reminds me of what they're doing to Schindler now, you know what I mean? And it was like that crowd of angry young Boston fans was really getting, and it's like a little bit of what's going on with the Celtics too now.
Yes.
and they just kind of had enough, after all of us who had suffered for decades. And it was almost like by 2004 we had to win because this is going to become a real problem of angry people not winning. So, but I always remember that series in '99. So when the Schiller started having all the problems, I started thinking of that fan again, and I use the term sometimes with affection, but masshole, and these people who really, are really, and I was pretty passionate about it, but again, it's at some point you got to tip your hat to the other guy and say I've been beaten, and I didn't really get that part of it,
Well, we are having an intriguing, Schulte West syndrome here because I'm bringing the whole family out in July. I think I mentioned to you, but my oldest daughter, the oldest child, Allie, her husband is named David, and so one of the times back east, they took a trek, and I think I've admitted to you, I've never been to Fenway, so you're gonna have to pick me up. We gotta go to Fenway.
Sure.
But he has been, and he fell in love with Fenway. And he's teetering on this Red Sox thing. We had a big meeting last night trying to plan our meeting, our trip, when we're going to go to Yankee Stadium and everything. And he won't stop talking about the Red Sox. And I said, oh, you're just trying to endear yourself to my mom, to Dot. But we've got like a Red Sox fan in the making here, an in-law and stuff. It's kind of that tribal thing we were talking about was getting a little hostile in the family meeting last night.
Yeah. Well, send me over the dates and I'll look at the schedule because I went to
well, they're not there, so we're gonna have to when I come out. So we're gonna have to pivot another,
another time
excuse to come out. Yeah,
I was gonna say,
trust me, I already looked to see it. I think if they were in, we might have been able to convince the whole family to do a family.
Well, it's funny. I'm gonna be out in LA again, and we go out to Newport every year. We used to live out there. So I think we talked about that.
Newport's awesome, great place.
And we're in so a lot of times we'll go catch an Angels game, and we're leaving July 3rd to come back east, and the Red Sox Angels start a 3-game series on July 3rd, so I'm gonna miss them. So so that'll be a tough one. But actually, I gotta tell you, I've been to Fenway, at least 150 times probably. I mean, I went to college in Boston to be near the Red Sox, and I've been to Wrigley a bunch of times with my oldest being out there. But the stadium, I tell you that I fell in love with was Dodger Stadium. I love Dodger Stadium, and I think Petco. We talked about Petco, but Dodger Stadium, there's something about it I think is awesome. Yankee Stadium has a lot of the feel of Dodger Stadium now, but it's something about the California feel to it. I love Dodger Stadium.
It's fun. That's a great stadium. It's very fan kind. I mean,
exactly.
It's a great place to take in a game. It definitely has a different vibe than New York stadiums. I feel like the food is different. Even it's the whole it's kind of that comparison to east to west. You got that laid back California fan. Everybody shows up a half an hour late.
No, exactly.
So that's a great stadium. Anaheim I like just because it's so easy to get in and out of.
Definitely.
But old John Sterling, I went back and watched a few of his favorite. I mean, and then every time we talk, I show my age, but the whole classic. It is high, it is far, it is not. I mean, it's just iconic. No one will be like that again. And he's kind of interesting because he kind of started back when the Yankees had that last really good run. 90s, 80s.
He kind of married right up with it. It seems like he started just about 95 when it all got going.
And then obviously the last X amount of years, except for 12 when we won it, but it's classic. He did. He called Jeter's 3,000 hit, which is just I don't even know how you hit a homer for your 3,000.
I think we were living in California then, and I was watching that, and you can't do it any better than that. Or then his last game when he got the hit to win the game, and it's like
that game, that hit against Baltimore. You just can't make this stuff up with Jeter. Exactly. And then and then obviously he called Judge's 62.
Yep.
So think of our career like that. I mean, just
the names
the World Series is in the 90s and the 2000, and then Jeter and Judge. I mean, that's And Judge is kind of going to be interesting to see how history judges him. No pun intended.
Yeah, sure.
If he doesn't get a championship.
Yeah, and I think honestly, I think they're. Yeah, I think he's young enough. I think it's going to come around at some point. Almost
he's older than you think. He's 34.
Yeah, no, but I mean, he's not something I always worry about. This is the one thing. And the Red Sox Mookie Betts trade was one of the worst trades in baseball history. But I think one of the reasons why they did it was because he relies so much on speed and everything he does. Like, he's obviously not the biggest and strongest guy. He, has quick back, quick legs, quick everything. Speed's going to slow down as you get older, as people know, right? Strength doesn't really slow down. Judge is about strength. I think he's got the wherewithal to maybe last into his 40s and he's in great shape, whatever,
And now if they can keep him out of center field, particularly,
that's good. That's true.
That's a big change.
But with Sterling, I used to love the names, kind of like the Berman thing.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I always like I enjoyed Sterling like I enjoyed Phil Rizzuto. They were just you're gonna you can tell your grandkids about them and all that stuff because of the way they put. But the person who I can't stand is Susan Waldman. So she was
the right hand. Yep.
Well, she used to be on, she's on WFN for a long time. And again, we were talking about WFN a little earlier, but so I used to listen to her a lot. But she was her whole shtick is she was a Red Sox fan growing up in the 60s in the Boston area. She was a very famous Broadway star. I mean, from what I understand, she was very good and very big, but she kind of used her Red Sox former fandom as some sort of credibility in all things Red Sox. And it's like, wait a second, you left us. And I think they might have left her, but so she would get on the fan and really go off. And I could get through pretty reasonably to argue. And it finally got to a point once I called up to argue with her, and her producer goes, I know you're right, but I just don't want to hear it today. She's like, So it's kind of funny. I had a couple arguments with her. I had one really big one I was talking about Mike Francesa earlier after Pedro and Zimmer got in that fight. Because I mean, just from 1978, I just hate all things Don Zimmer. I don't care.
Yeah.
Pedro could have done whatever he wanted to. I didn't care. It's like Zimmer just did it. So
there's a narrative about, starting with, obviously Ruth and going from there, folks that played for both the Red Sox and the Yankees, whether it's Wade Boggs, because the Red Sox had that reunion, all their retired numbers this past week.
Yeah.
So Boggs was there.
And I think they're about to go there with Clemens. They're doing a bobblehead for him. They're about to flip the switch with Clemens finally, which I think they need to do at some point.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, he can kind of be a jerk, but man, you look back. I was, it was just the 40th anniversary. I remember I was at West Point listening to his first 20 strikeout game. I was trying to listen to Whalers that night. Wear my Whalers shirt. I was trying to listen to Whalers against the Canadians in Game 7 of the Adams Finals that night. End up listening to the Red Sox on TIC. West Point got a pretty good connection there, and I got to listen to Clemens' 20 strikeout game. So so good times though. But I think I think what we want to talk a little bit about is again talking a little bit about this and the history of the rivalry, but then also kind of the tribes it creates. And I know your family had its own tribes between the two and all that stuff. So
it's interesting. The tribe component of it, and we're seeing it. My wife just went for a walk, I think, and we're seeing it play out in kind of a different component this week, or actually the week that we talked last week, with the voters' right and being rescinded, or I don't know if I'm trying to pick my words carefully, so feel free to jump in because I'm trying to show, maybe getting back to the whole dignity
sure,
trying to show SCOTUS, which I don't know if they deserve any, some respect, saying there's a decision, because sometimes it's, and even Obama statements and stuff, it's easy to just say, hey, they've gutted the Voters Act, which is probably the result of the decision. But, they were looking at, Louisiana and this type of thing. It's interesting because Utah went through this whole, with the Prop 4, same exact thing as Virginia, which she made a kind of, I know,
talk about that.
Virginia, well, it was a referendum out here, and it's been through the Utah Supreme Court. And the thing that's interesting for a lot of folks, and it gets back to, again, pivoting back to, the history, right, of our country, is this whole state rights versus, the federal government, right? And so Utah's been funny because no matter which turn the opposition went against this voters referendum, which is, for a committee to recommend maps.
Yep.
And then the legislature was saying, well, the Constitution says that, the maps is just with the legislators, not with, the people. But then they said, well, yeah, but the Constitution calls for people have the right to do a referendum.
Yeah.
And it took about, I want to say at least 8 years, maybe 10 years. And now it's finally here. So Utah is on the other end of this whole experience because the GOP is frustrating because, we've got a solid Democratic district now.
Yeah.
And they're kind of tied up. This is the opposite end of Virginia.
Yep. And they want to
because, they can't really appeal to they probably will, but they really can't appeal because it's really not a federal thing.
Yeah.
Although Trump is making it one.
Sure.
Those, the way the elections are run is constitutionally with the states.
Sure.
Hence, the frustration with Virginia is that that's a Virginia Supreme Court. So really, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out because do you have any options with what happened to Virginia referendum? They win it. It's a vote. And like some folks said that, they basically threw out ours was a little bit different because the courts were supporting the people.
Yeah.
Virginia is a little bit different because they're throwing out the results of an election.
Sure. And I think it's sort of a technicality in Virginia for now. And again, I haven't.
That's what I was hearing today.
They're kind of basically. What's that?
That's what I was hearing today. So
it's kind of the timing of
wording or something.
The amendment. I think it needed I think they needed to amend their state constitution, whether they did that correctly or not, because they weren't supposed to do. I mean, really, I don't think it would be. I think there's some laws that govern federal races. You can't have a recall election of a congressman or a senator, even at the state. And I do think maybe what would be, again, and Republicans aren't going to agree to this at this point, but would be a good law amendment, whatever, is that you can't in between 2020 and 2030 keep changing your districts. You lock in for 10 years after the caucus. That frankly, if 2 or 3 years ago, I wouldn't have known that wasn't the case. Now it's like it's becoming very apparent. But I think it's it's just I think what the court would fall back on is, and I think is kind of what they did fall back on, is that you think about it, if the world was perfect, we wouldn't need the Voting Rights Act. And you could make an argument that it is, but it almost within hours of it being overturned, they showed exactly why we need it. Because
so what do we got? Tennessee, we got Louisiana, Virginia. Yeah, there's one of the ones that's very kind of
Tennessee, Louisiana, Virginia, Alabama.
I mean, so within literally not even not days but hours.
And I think honestly, again, I was looking at Cook Political Report, did some stuff with AI and stuff like that, but I kind of projected that if we see this shift left we're seeing. This is before all this went down, because around the time in Virginia, I was looking at this when we thought we had the 4 votes. Because the truth is, every time 4 votes moves, it's really 8 votes, because we get 1, they lose 1. So it's really a 2 vote swing.
Yeah, exactly. It's an 8 vote difference. Yeah,
exactly. So it looked like we were going to have a 10-point movement left. We would have a 20 to 50 point seat pickup is what they were looking at. And I think we probably are looking at 0 to 30. We're probably looking at tie to 30 now becomes the range. So, and again, the last time I checked, the betting markets were still pretty heavily would have a Democratic House. What it frankly could do is I don't think we're going to get nearly as healthy a majority in the House as we did, but it is going to drive voters to the polls. Right. It could have some more impact on the Senate. You know what I mean? That you could have more people, more upset, more passion. That could help the Democrats in the Senate, which becomes more. What I'm more concerned about, what happens we're not in a blue wave election. Is it even possible that we win the House? I think it's going to end up lining up almost like the Electoral College, where these states are making winner take all. Either you're going to have a blue state, because the blue states are going to have to push back and say, we're going to have these crazy gerrymandered states. And I think in the New England states, they're going to have to rewrite the constitutions, because I don't think technically we can have gerrymandered, and we are all blue. But I think we want to ensure we're all blue. Yeah. But it's it's going to have to be, you're going to have to take a gun to this gunfight and not a knife for the Democrats.
And that goes back to our conversations, that we've been having about the dignity and trying to, conduct themselves, in a professional and wholesome manner. But what does that look like, and is it possible right now? And and I don't know, it's interesting. Sometimes I reflect back, and again, we continue to show our age, but you look at Tip O'Neill, and Orrin Hatch. So you've got two diametrically opposed folks, but they actually worked on some bills together. There's some history there, and they were just
I think they both
about how they went about their business, even if they had differing positions and stuff. And that skill set, it seems to be dissipating in the, and is it because it has to be? There is no way to, again, do I have to bring that knife to the fight now, because otherwise I'm gonna get stabbed. It's really kind of the and it's the situation we find ourselves, and then it just trickles down to your everyday experiences and how we interact with our friends and our neighbors. Obviously I live in a very red state, and it can impact just your everyday coming and going. You impact your workplace, lots of different things. So it's an intriguing time. And then, we kind of alluded to this last week, reflecting back to, have we come full circle? So LBJ really pulling all the levers and, and
knowing he was giving the South away when he did it. And
he was, giving, he got selected by Kennedy because of the South. He could bring Texas, and now it was historic. I mean, it's one of the most historical. The Voters' Right and the Civil Rights Act; those things are huge. And have we come? So what is that? 60 years now? Yeah, 60 years.
Like 65, 61 years.
Yeah. And so have we come? Has it come full circle and circulated full circle? And you said it just a moment ago. If you want to give, it was funny. Our Chief Justice went on this week kind of on a temper tantrum and crying. Don't pick on me. You guys are picking on me. And
you're calling us political. It's like, they don't act political.
Exactly.
I've talked to you a little bit about how I like these. I'm fascinated by these dots in American history that get connected and frankly repeat themselves as we go through, again, 80-year cycles, forget things, whatever. And, you really put yourself, you go to the post-Reconstruction, you go to Reconstruction period, and then, you had a lot of African-American congressmen and senators coming from the South. And then you get to the election of 1877. And the Democrat or the Republicans, in order to let's say conservative liberal.
And that's where it's very hard for folks can't realize the flip flop. But continue on.
Apparently, if you're a Republican, it's impossible to comprehend. Because they always like to say, "Hey, Lincoln was one of ours." Like, well, he would have been one of ours today. So, very short-sighted to win that election. Again, maybe if the election is won by the Democrats, then everything happened. Reconstruction ends regardless. But to get Rutherford elected, they end up ending Reconstruction, and then it ends. Ali Velshi, who I'm not a huge fan of on MS now, he had a nice piece about it the other night, kind of triggered a lot in my mind about it. But you end up reversing all that progress that been made during Reconstruction, and again, it just goes back to, if Lincoln had lived, it probably is a different story, the way things play out. Johnson obviously undermined a lot of what we were doing, Andrew Johnson at LBJ. And now it's like you feel like we're right at the moment after the Compromise of 1877. It's right where we're at again. That, you're going to have Jim Crow law, and Jim Crow came within hours. And that was an 88-year battle. It's like,
right, that's what I'm saying.
Here we go.
We're in what are next steps? I mean, you look at this midterm, and it's kind of going back to what we talked about at the beginning, we've never, in my lifetime haven't, it was just an assumption, the districts were redrawn every 10 years with the census. That was just kind of, I guess I was pretty naive. I didn't even know you could do a lot of what, and it's interesting because, folks complain, but, it get a little bit of what we talked about previously. Texas starts to do it. And I guess the expectation is that the left should have just thrown their head up and said, "Oh my, what are we going to do?" and do nothing.
Yeah, sure.
So this is this whole cycle here is so intriguing, and and I always says a fish rots from the head. If President Trump doesn't encourage or facilitate or these type of movements, we'd be sitting with districts that are districts, not this. Sure. Now what the heck's going to happen? Is it just every 2 years these we're going to redraw things, and is it just going to become a pure free for all?
The technology exists today to say, again, we could go into AI, put a series of prompts in and say, give us geometrically equally distant maps. Now, again, the problem does become when you go to the Voting Rights Act that these districts were created to protect. They were built around protecting those votes. Like a state like Connecticut, we've got 6 representatives, and they're all blue. And they've done a little bit of trimming around the edges, but for the most part, the map has stayed fairly consistent. And I think makes sense for the state. I mean, the East is kind of its own district, and the areas you grew up and I live in it's carved up into the 5 others. And there's definitely been, I know Shelton, where I grew up, it was part of the New Haven district for a long time, and now it's part of, or it's more part of the Waterbury district. Now it's part of the Fairfield County district. Probably some play there. Shelton's a pretty conservative city, town. Actually, it's a city. It's a city. So by moving that, they end up diluting that vote. So there's some gamesmanship there, but for the most part, I think it's been fairly above the board. Yeah. I think that but again, it's we have the technology today now. That if the other side, I think especially would say, well, somebody wrote the technology and they're trying to screw us, right? So,
right. Or you can use the technology to screw everybody. You can say, hey, this is what we have. Yeah. Give us as many red districts as we can.
Exactly.
Take Memphis and divide it up in 3. Exactly. Things like that.
Exactly.
And I think these things happen in Utah.
These districts are going to start looking almost like pizza pies, with the center of the pie being the city, and then the slices of pie coming out, so they can keep that city divided up into many pieces as possible.
Well, that's what Utah was. So Salt Lake County is blue. I mean, and primarily Salt Lake. And so the argument or the observation was, well, every district needed to have urban, suburbs, and rural in it. Yeah. So they would take these just enormously long, narrow districts and take a slide. And so Salt Lake City, and Salt Lake County would be divided up, into multiple districts, and just be these long, angular ones that went west and east. And that was the argument. Say, well, we got to, make sure we have a representation of all different components of folks in every district.
Sure.
And so you ended up with what you talked about. But the big thing is going back to, seeing this secular event, this tribism, folks really, it's, I mean, this past week has been, you watch some of the videos and, watch some of our folks that, representatives that are Black, well, I think there's a one picture. I can't remember what state. You probably could pick up on it, but the Senate was drawing up the new districts, and
Tennessee, I think, right?
Yeah, and the gentleman, the Black gentleman that was actually the current representative couldn't get into the meeting. The sergeant of arms wouldn't let him in.
Well, that's going to be the next thing. They're going to start to divide up their state legislatures to keep out representation. And that's where they're really going to be able to enforce a lot of power, because then, you hope that we can keep states like Michigan, Pennsylvania in the fairly blue consensus now, because once they get a majority red, we're in trouble. Wisconsin, because they did a lot of this gerrymandering in advance, is, it's basically a slightly blue state, but it's very red in its representation. But there's going to come a state at some point, like Trump tried to do in 2024, that is going to capitulate and try to overturn the will of the voters. I think that's our bigger risk. I really think the thing that people are worried about, ICE showing up at the polls, I think they've almost telegraphed that too far in advance. I think it's more of a legislative risk that concerns me around this upcoming election. One of the things I did want to ask you, Paul, actually, I found it fascinating around the 2024 election, is Utah, with all the influx of tech. I mean, I know it's becoming with the Silicon Slopes, whatever. Is it having much? And again, tech now, obviously, when we thought it was left, it's turning a little bit right. But I think it's more the Peter Thiels and the Musks. Whatever. Yeah. Is the rank and file tech, I think, tends to be a little more progressive. Is that having any impact on the state's politics, or is it really being diluted by the
et cetera? Not yet. Yeah, but the horizon looks interesting. So, Provo, where Brigham Young University is, so these younger, I say children because everybody's younger than me, but these young adults, they're starting. So Provo voted blue.
Yep.
And and so it's a little bit of the tech, but it's also just the next, 2 generations now right behind us that are starting to weigh into more of a blue leaning type of perspective. In Utah, Utah is growing so large. We don't have and that's why the data center that was just, it was national news with O'Leary and stuff pushing forward. And then we don't have the water that we need. We live in a desert, and this thing that they're building. And so it was really interesting because Box Elder County, where Janine and I lived, Janine was born in Box Elder County. It's one of the northern counties, the most north. It's an agricultural. I have great friends. I learned how I drove, a huge combine during the summer when I was teaching there. My friends were cattle farmers and,
multi-talented.
Yeah. And water, in Utah, the history of water rights, people kill for water rights. Yeah. It's a big deal. And so for this thing to come in, it was really interesting. So Box Elder County, I think about 78% voted for Trump. Yeah. So that's about as red as you get. Yeah. And to see these folks like, oh heck, what's going on? And then to see the government and in all its flaws, you basically have what they call Midas, which is I guess a group that's kind of there. And I'm probably not really sounding real knowledgeable here, but a first tier group of legislators and state leaders that vote on partnerships with the government and the defense. Yep. And they voted on it and kind of approved it. And then it went to, it's crazy. And sometimes folks get positions and they don't realize how they're going to get thrown in the middle of things, right? So these 3 gentlemen are also the commissioners for Box Elder County. 3 people. Yeah. And I don't know them personally, but I'll bet you they're farmers. Yeah, sure. But they voted for that, to approve it. This is 40,000 acres. It's actually astronomical. It's bigger than Manhattan. Yeah. Okay. And it said it takes up like 20. It takes up the water of 20,000 homes. And so, folks that don't live in Utah, the Great Salt Lake, which we're kind of known for, the thing is drying up. We had the lowest. Had a real bad year of skiing. I bought a pass and I went one day. It was just the snowpack's like 40% of normal. Wow. So so in the next week or 2, the governor's going to come out and say, hey, water less, do this less. So we can have in the same breath. A week ago, he was supporting this center that's going to, that's going to use up an enormous amount of water. But it was intriguing to watch that county go through this process. Very conservative folks that supported it. Yeah. And I think I heard one folk on the know say, I've never agreed with the left except for this thing. Yeah, so, and that's what it takes to get over this tribism when you're all of a sudden on the front lines of an issue that, when it doesn't affect you, it's a different thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's, part of, and, obviously for me, for the line in the promised land, the Rattlesnake Speedway in the Utah desert. So it's near and dear to me. Yeah. So I think that, when you get, and I read about another district, I think in a southern state, was going through the same thing with data centers, where people felt really betrayed. And again, that's Trump's life's history, is betraying the people who trust him. And again, it doesn't take a lot of reading about him to get that. You hope that like I said, pull a string or two. And again, I probably went through this more than you did, but you start to say, and it all starts to unravel, and I think from, I think we get to this, you start to get to this tribalism, and I think these things all come together now, right? It's about really the focus in our country is about, has always been, and again, I sometimes want to say this, but, in my business world, I don't want to get too caught up in this quote, is, the history of America is the rich screwing the poor. And, so the racism is probably driven less by the fact that black and white, is that most black people are poor. And then you get to I think you brought up the quote from LBJ about, LBJ is said, all you got to do to get the poorest rich white man on your side is to tell him you're better than any black man, and all of a sudden he'll give you every penny in his pocket. And I go back to Dylan's song, "The Pawn in the Game." The same thing is that these people who really, it's that whole, I love that thing, when I love it, but I think it's very telling, is that you got a union worker, an immigrant, and a rich man at the table, and there's a dozen cookies. The rich man's got his arm around 11 cookies. He's telling the union worker, watch the immigrant, he's trying to take your cookie. Like, it's that's where the tribes start to get created, about this, the division, the wedges they're trying to create amongst us to keep us on their side, keep them on their side, I should say.
And if you go back and you study the history of LBJ and his presidency, which is just a tragic story, started out so strong, and then Vietnam became such a quagmire and just a terrible thing. But Dr. King pivots after those two bills, right? And now what's his next thing? He's and LBJ wanted to do this, but Dr. King started making very aggressive. The poverty issue, the inequality in income and stuff. That was his next step, right?
And Hoover really starts to go after King too, with all the blackmail stuff. Yeah.
And then Dr. King starts being actively against Vietnam. And why is that? Because disproportionate members of the poor and black young people are fighting that war. Yeah. And that's when it's, and obviously, that he was in the thralls of those two focuses when he was killed. People that, they kind of could handle the civil rights thing, which sounds kind of amazing, right? Sure. But when they went after the income and the war, it got a little dicey.
Mary Alice and I were talking about it a little bit today when we'll listen on Sirius, we'll listen to MSNBC sometimes, and they were talking about how Martin Luther King III sent a letter to the Tennessee legislature asking them to reconsider. And you're thinking, and they're taking the district away from Memphis, and
exactly
where King was killed. It's like, so it's almost like a tone deafness on their part, because Dallas for a long time did feel guilt around killing JFK. I don't really ever get the sense around Memphis feeling the same way around Martin Luther King, and now it's just almost like a real gut punch to what that movement was about. And I think you get into these again, it does start to tie into just the nature of trying to be a good, fair person, like how, and we talked about it during the Dignity, I think, index in the examples of Martin Luther King and Gandhi trying to do things the right way. And even when you're trying to treat them with respect and dignity, they still bite that hand that's trying to feed them. So
yeah. And I don't know, and so that brings up the questions, right? It's taken, like we said, 60 plus years to undo this.
Yep.
So and the Democratic Party, they'll eat their young to get, they're not, they don't rally necessarily to, like
What's the
GOP
herding cats
does.
aspect of it? Right?
Oh, it is. And so, so what is the next step?
Yeah.
I'll be darned if I know, because getting Democrats on the same page and united in a certain movement or a certain perspective, as opposed to our colleagues, the GOPs, which you got to tip your hat. They unify like none other, and the Dems can. They literally, I mean, they will kill each other on the way to get into our candidate.
I think there's a couple things on that I are near and dear to me. On it is, we have a playbook, the Roe versus Wade playbook.
Correct.
50 years they took, and they were insane to think they were going to overturn Roe versus Wade, the direction the country is moving, etc. But they never gave up. And but I would argue, to your point, and this is what I believe the future is more progressive than where we stand today. But I think at the end of the day, what Republicans do, and they do well, is they worry about winning elections first and then policy. And even, like right now, you have a lot of MAGA primarying moderate Republicans, and in most cases, they're going to win because in a lot of districts. But if they do lose, those MAGA, for the most part, are going to get behind that moderate Republican because they realize that that's the gate to getting where they want to go. Democrats just don't. Democrats are professional field goal movers, field goal post movers. And I go back to when I was working on the Harris campaign. I went out to Pennsylvania about 5 weekends in a row. We went into, I mentioned it's the first episode. We went out to very rural areas of Pennsylvania because people just weren't out there campaigning. And the last person Mary Alice and I knocked on the door of, it was in a trailer park. And we were there to meet a guy who was Democrat. You have a lot of tech now. You have an app that it's going to be funny now with AI how much they can get into it. But it gives you an app, and it shows you all the times this person visited. And frankly, one of the things, you start to roll your eyes going, we've talked to this guy a dozen times already. He's probably sick of us. But so we're out there to visit a guy. He's Democrat. Make sure he's going to vote for us. His mother happens to be there. She's an independent. And he starts right in on me how he can't vote for Harris because Biden and Harris have screwed over Gaza. And you're like, okay, so you're trying to go there with him. And you're like, well, you think Trump's going to do any better? And it's
there's the irony, right?
Yeah. Or I have to punish the Democratic Party, even if he's not going to do any better. And meanwhile, his mother's telling Mary Alice, I can't tell him, but I already sent my mail ballot in for Harris. And she's not even Democrat. And this guy, I mean, he's calling me names, swearing at me. And I mean, he's kind of the 400-pound guy in the basement that Trump talks about, on his computer. And you're just like, you want to pull your hair out, it's just like, because this is the problem is, and even like, it was funny. AOC said in 2020, she said if we were in Europe, her and Biden wouldn't even be in the same party. And she's right. She would have been in the Labor Party. He would have been in the left center party. But they would have formed a coalition government afterwards, and they would have formed a left-wing party. And that's what our primaries do. They force these coalitions together. It's the nature of our elections. That's the problem. I call it the horseshoe left. Is they in a sense they have more in common with the horseshoe right because they're chaos agents. They just want to see things mixed up, and this is why we can't have nice things. This is why we can't.
It is that challenge. When I ran for the city council, I ran twice. This last one was kind of just, I wanted to make sure someone had opposition. I didn't really.
It's always
the first time I was all in.
Yeah.
And mathematically, if I could, I had the same type of data and programs, but if I could get all the Dems that voted to come out, I would win.
Yeah.
By a landslide.
Sure.
I mean, it would have been in call, knock, mail, and I couldn't get them to come out. I mean, I would say, and this is very typical of a presidential election compared to just, a local election or mid-cycle election, things like that. But I think, my little district, 900 folks voted Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
In the presidential election when I ran, I got 40 something percent, but it's only 300 votes.
Yeah, sure. Sure.
You know, and so
You'll get the
so there's so many multi layers to this thing, and so you know, the midterms, and you know, and then the thing that we all get exhausted. I mean, if I was king for a day,
yep,
you know, and so you know, we have, because you know, you're gonna have to correct me here because my brain's going vapor lock. I'm forgetting the case where where the corporations were called people with the money. What's it, Citizen?
Oh, Citizens United.
Yeah, thanks, Citizen United. Okay, but you know, in a perfect world, I always say, okay, look at the federal government would pay for everything, and once you get primaried, here's your budget. Because I would love to see people. How do you manage your budget? Hey, if you get X $1 million to run a campaign,
that's the way most democracies do it. You know, they limit the amount of spending, etc. They limit the time, and really try to make it about
because it can tell you a lot about a person, how they you know, how they manage their resources and how they manage their time. And
it's probably a better indication of what they'll be as a leader than if they were able to raise,
particularly, you know, for executive offices. You know, so and so you know, so the challenge, I think, is, you know, it's going to be a huge fist fight in the Democratic Party between, you know, now and, you know, whenever they pick, you know, when we pick ours, so what would that be, you know, around January 28th, and then it's going to be just a hot mess of. And with the moderates, you know, if it was someone like an AOC or somebody really progressive, would moderate Democrats
and I think she's become more of a stateswoman over the years.
She has.
I'm more on board, but I tell you, when I lived in Michigan during the 2020 campaign, we were very heavily into Biden out there. You saw AOC more on Republican ads than anyone else, and Pelosi was a lot, whatever. But they, and again, and like you said, they're not stupid people, and they see our soft underbelly because, you know, and I get populist Democrats are good people, but populist movements have always been tough on this country because every right-wing populist movement comes as a reflection, you got to watch the left-wing populist movement that's going on at the moment, and it's a fear movement. You know, it's what happened in Germany, and you know, and when Hitler came in, is they've got the KPD, there's the SPD, who was kind of the centrist party, you know, which we call Hindenburg's party, etc. And they were very they were being torn apart from the left and the right, even though it was a left center party. The KPD was the Communist Party. Then you had obviously the Nazi Party, and the KPD did so much of Hitler's work for him, undermining the center. And again, they never got a huge amount of vote. They got 10, 12, 15%, but it was enough to tear apart the center and allow him to get elected with 35% of the vote at the time. So I think that's it's a lesson to learn that, and it's our biggest problem is, I think it's the passion of our party. I think it's a lot of the good of our party, but bringing all these elements together. And that's why we got to get rid of people like Schumer. You know, I don't see Schumer as binding anyone together. Right. Honestly, I think Jeffries made a huge mistake. I think there's this weird feeling in Congress, and I'm fairly sure they're wrong about it, is that people go out and they vote for Congress. They don't vote for Congress, they vote for their congressperson. So right. I think Jeffries, when McCarthy was having problems, because McCarthy was obviously an imperfect vessel, I can't stand him, but he was willing to go head to head with Trump. You know, he was willing to battle him on things. And I think he had a little bit of a modicum of was trying to do right for his country, unlike Johnson, and we were going to get somebody like Johnson. You know, there's no doubt we were going to get somebody like that once McCarthy was out. I think Jeffrey should have come to a deal with McCarthy and kept him in power, because McCarthy had enough. All he needed, if he had the full Democratic majority behind him, he had enough Republicans. And his whole idea that the Democrats couldn't vote for a Republican, I'm like, you know, maybe that's traditional, but we're not in traditional times.
Situation,
you know? And I really think Jeffries. I mean, it's going to be historic if he becomes Speaker of the House in a few months or whatever. But I don't think he's done a good job as minority leader. And I know he's getting a lot of advice. He's obviously just in the role. I'm sure people like Pelosi and all were telling him can't do this. But man, and this isn't Monday morning quarterback, and I was on top of the time, like, really, he should figure out the Republican he wants. He's not going to get it. Yeah. Figure out the Republican he wants, strike a deal, and put us in the best position to counter what was coming at the time. And I thought he missed that boat. And frankly, and it's getting a little better, but the most dysfunctional Democratic Party in the country is in New York. And yet probably the two most powerful Democrats in the country are from New York. Like,
right.
How does that make any sense? It's like, and meanwhile, this party can, in a big blue state, can barely win elections statewide, and we've got these two in charge. I don't get it. So,
and in defense of him, Jeffries, I think what he thinks is given the history and the makeup and the approach of our Democratic Party, is if I was to broker a deal like that, I won't be the Speaker of the House.
Well,
I think that's probably what was resonating in the back of his mind.
And we'll never know the road less traveled, right? Like if McCarthy had maintained power then, and McCarthy would have done a lot of things we hated. There's no doubt about it. And every time they've been like, "What, Jeffries gave him the power?" But
exactly,
I honestly don't think we'd be in as bad a position with the capitulation to Trump.
But what you're doing is you're pivoting to the central challenge that we have, right?
Exactly.
So we spent the last 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes talking of political strategies, these type of things, right?
Yep.
But if we take a step back and kind of why I am where I am, why I approach things is really we want to try to find the policies and the best approach for what's best for people.
Yeah,
that's become that organic, holistic policy making of the why. It's becoming. It's almost like the last bit of the conversations at times. It's not really. It seems like sometimes not the most prevalent. And you've mentioned how the GOP, they're excellent at creating fear. People coming for your jobs, the worst of the worst, these type of things. And so the real challenge is, again, you and I would probably say, I would love before my lifetime to see universal health care.
Yep.
I mean,
I agree too.
I think, and then we're talking about this increase in defense that is like astronomical. I mean, it's absolutely mind-boggling the amount of. But if you talk about universal healthcare, the first thing that happens is we talk about the cost, and I'm like, and I haven't become smart enough yet to figure out what's the path of getting people. This getting back to this tribalism, right? These Southeast states that. The masses, I mean, you talk about Kentucky, they're the poor of the poor, and they vote against their interests just about almost without exception every election. Yep. And so how do we get folks to really become engaged, understand really to simplify what the left is really about, which is, hey, we do want to, when COVID was, closing down and, some of the funding, the Senate could have voted. I can't remember what the bill was, but I remember then you'll probably know the details on this, but they could have voted to keep feeding everybody, all the kids breakfast. Indefinitely. It's a fraction. It's minuscule compared to compared to what we're spending in Iran and what Trump's asking for. And I'm telling you that's not, being an educator, breakfast for kids is not a poor, rich thing.
Exactly.
Those of us that have, we're still running out the door in the morning, throwing a Pop-Tart at a kid, right? Every kid benefits, rich, poor, middle, if you get fed in the morning when you go to school. And it's things like that how do we get folks to take a breath, stop drinking the Kool-Aid, and really talk about policies and how we best spend our dollar and how do we, help everybody.
And I think the thing about the universal breakfast, even lunch, is what again, I haven't seen it probably as much in action as you've seen, but what I understand is it's in a hard, and I think I remember a little bit going back, 40 years, 50 years when I was in school, is it's not hard to pick out the kids. They're getting these subsidized meals, and it becomes a stigma around them. Where if we just get rid of the stigma, it makes it everybody. Nobody know, and then you get the kids now who pile up the bills, and you got. I mean, some of the best people using their money, I think, is when they come in and they pay off all the debt for all the kids. I mean, it's those are the type of things I think are good use of money. I think just one real quick thing on the. So to me, as a financial officer, I always kind of say, look, in my mind, if we take the if we take the amount of money we're spending on premiums, which frankly is a small business issue, because small businesses really get clobbered because big businesses can put the buying power together to get things small businesses can't. That's why you see they call captive plans becoming big, because small businesses get some buying power, big businesses. But we spend, billions upon billions of dollars a year, with consultants. So I hate when people go, this insurance is good, this insurance is bad. Those insurances are all designed by your employers for some motivation.
Yeah.
And the amount of time that the employers spend designing those plans, and the amount of time that and the amount of money consultants get to be the bridge over to the United Healthcare's, who then their CEOs and all got to get paid a crap load of money. Not that they should be assassinated, but they got to get paid a lot of money. It's unfathomable. So if you take just the premiums that the companies are paying and say, okay, it's not going to be a premium you're going to pay to a central government. And I hate when people go, well, the government screws everything up. It's like, how are you a patriot and love this country when you hate the government so much? You know what I mean? Like, that is the people who are in our government are our government. So you say, well, it's a waste, or we'll fix our government then. Don't throw the baby out the bathwater. And so I've seen it. I've done 35 years of this now. And I tell you, any CFO out there who says that they don't want a universal health care is either stupid or a liar, or is so worried about paying taxes that they're worried about creating more of a tax culture, because this ultimately becomes a tax.
Right.
But again, if you want to say you're for small business, this is a great way to level that playing field, because big businesses get an advantage over small businesses in cost that is astronomical, because they can get they have such a higher population that their per person cost of healthcare is it's not a fraction, but it's literally 30, 40, 50% of what those small businesses are paying.
Right.
Now, Obamacare helped, but it's still not there. So it's a real pet peeve of mine around.
But it pivots back to what my central. We did classic Schulte there, talking over each other. My bad.
Oh, sorry,
no, that was me. You were going, but it gets back to, I think there's a central challenge in politics. I don't even like to say just policy making and governing, right? How do we govern? Is really getting, it's like I gave you the example last week about immigration. We don't spend any time solving it. We just use it as a way to win. And my goal or my hope someday in my lifetime is that we can spend a little more time on solutions and a little bit less time on demonizing and stuff. And whether you hear universal health care and all of a sudden, and also you're just kind of a whim idea with your financial background and stuff. It said, I tell folks, and they look at me strange, and said, we've subsidized all of NATO's, we're paying for universal health care right now, because we pay all this cost for the military to support them, and that's cost that they don't have to pay for the military that they can put towards universal health care. And they look at me cross-eyed, and I'm saying, guys, I'm telling you the truth. We are paying for everybody else's universal health care except for ours by paying for the cost of the military.
The amount that we give in free arms to Israel is just under $4 billion a year. Israel's subsidy to pay for their universal health care does have a small premium, less than, I think, a few $100s a month per family, like $20 copays, is almost exactly $4 billion a year. I mean,
so we're paying for
dollar. What we give them allows them to fund their health care. I mean, it is obvious.
And if you take start adding up all of NATO.
No, definitely.
And they're all universal health care countries.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
so I think
getting people to connect those dots.
I think to your point about solutions, Paul, I think you're spot on. It's like this is the part that gives you most heartache. It's like, it sucks being in this moment. We shouldn't feel sorry for ourselves. Americans have had to fight for worse moments. The question is, how do we move forward when they're really boxing in every piece? I think one of the things that I've kind of come around over the last, especially few months, and I kind of, like my wife, I know it tears a part of her soul out every time we hear another story. And almost you have to you're almost dying the same death multiple times, because when Trump got elected, in my mind, all these things happened. They were going to come. There's no bottom. He's going to do whatever he wants to do. And she kind of gets so upset every time she sees them doing something else crappy to another person. And I'm like, it's already, you can't, the more you replay this, it kills you 5 times instead of 1 time. But I think that in my mind right now, the blood we're shedding, and again, I don't think, we haven't lost a lot of people in the Middle East, but obviously there's been a lot of attacks on our soldiers, and I think a lot of the injuries involved, et cetera, have been worse than we think. But the amount of money we're going to pay at the pump, the the data centers that are going to destroy a lot of parts of our country, that are going to turn people against, the Trumps and the Thiels, whatever. It feels like on some level, this is the price we're going to have to pay to destroy this movement. And it's awful to say, but it feels like we're going to take this big step backwards in order to hopefully move better into a more perfect union.
Yeah, I think so. It's just a journey, but we're getting up there in our years. I'm hoping we can see us come out the backside in this lifetime is the goal. But
starting out, when you think about 61 years cycle on the civil rights movement, you think about 88 years since the compromise 1877 to the civil rights movement. Those aren't years we have left, right?
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, but hopefully we'll condense it a little bit with AI and we'll get there faster. So.
For sure. Yeah, and again, pivoting back to what we've talked about the last few weeks, that I think one of the main ways of working through this tribalism is trying to actually connect, so people find out, hey, I'm not some fanatic. You're a reasonable person. You're a kind person, and this is true. I mean, this is me being Pollyanna, obviously. Yeah. But the commonalities are a lot more significant than the differences are. And so, like you said, the right has a great strategy of pointing out, I don't even know if it's differences, but just that fear mongering and stuff. And if we can talk and come to the table, remember the old Coke commercial at Christmas time, that the long table in the hallway. We got to start doing that somehow.
Yeah, no, you're right. People have to start voting in their best interest. I think one of the things I kind of bring up is, it's an incredibly effective short-term strategy, and it's hard to box out. I kind of look at it that, especially with the way we're running deficits now, is, so we're, in a sense, the deficits dilute the dollar. Yeah. So if you have a dollar today, in terms of pure numbers, it's probably worth $1.05, but the value isn't any greater or whatever. So you have this is the way I kind of describe it, is the Republicans have diluted the dollar, so a dollar should be $1.10. Well, the guy who's now dollar is $1.05 thinks he's doing great, but meanwhile he's losing ground. But who's got $1.15 is the billionaire, because his PACs are making sure he doesn't lose anything, or it's more of a transfer of wealth. And and with our short-term thinking in the stock market and politics, it's just so hard to have people see longer term. It's frustrating, and it's going to be the key to getting out of this situation.
I agree. Great. Well, between now and next week, Paul,
I'm sure we're going to get plenty of more.
We'll have
between now and then. So.
One thing about this, our visit, it's never for lack of material.
No, definitely.
It'll get interest, as we move towards the fall and things.
We're moving in under 6 months now till midterms, and it's becoming probably more interesting because everything has happened the last few weeks, and it's got to happen. We at very least have to put the brakes on what they're doing. Otherwise, I don't think any of us can handle 2 more years of this. We got to put the brakes on it. So
correct.
At least freeze them a little bit. Anyway, Paul, thanks a lot. Have a great week. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care, buddy.
Goodbye.